Politics found a way into college football when activists stormed the field at the storied Harvard-Yale matchup. The protest briefly delayed the game between the two rivals, with students and alumni from both schools partaking in the protest.
According to reports, a majority of the protesters left after about an hour, but roughly 42 demonstrators stayed on the field and were charged with misdemeanor disorderly conduct. Here via Skype to discuss the protest and what students hope to accomplish is James Coleman. He's an organizer with Divest Harvard and Harvard Undergraduates for Environmental Justice. Welcome, James.
Hello, how are you?
Good to see you, James. How are you?
So tell us what you're fighting for here.
So we are fighting for our institutions to divest their endowments. Harvard and Yale have a combined endowment of $71 billion. And we want them to divest that from the fossil industry, as well as cancel their holdings in Puerto Rican debt. And this is not just for divestment. We are fighting for the broader movement of environmental and climate justice.
Mm-hmm. So, James, I think you're highlighting an excellent point, which is that Harvard goes out here, says that climate change is an existential threat. Their professors and all these people it's heavily invested within this narrative, but their endowment continues to not only invest in fossil fuels, but a whole host of other corporate interests. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's definitely right. We have several divestment campaigns on campus. Fossil fuel divest Harvard, divestment from Puerto Rican debt, as well as the Harvard prison divestment campaign.
Mm-hmm. How has the university responded to your demands thus far?
So the Harvard and Yale administrators really haven't been listening to student voices. They've been saying their same old talking points, saying that they want to have shareholder activism, that by having holdings that they could encourage these companies to change their business practices, but there really hasn't been any evidence of them doing so, and there hasn't been any evidence of shareholder activism being effective at all, since fossil fuel companies have their business model built on extraction and exploitation of the planet, the burning of fossil fuels. There's really no incentive for the fossil fuel industry to change their practices at all.
I am curious, James, are you going to face any pushback from the administration? I mean, obviously they must be pretty pissed off that you guys stormed the field. Will they expect any judicial action or administrative action taken against any of these students?
Potentially. In the past, they have taken minor action, but as of now, we are not aware of any.
Okay.
Thus far.
How big is this movement on campus, and what was it like being on the field? What did that experience feel like?
So I wasn't personally on the field. I was helping direct off-field action as well as media, but it was extremely inspiring to see so many people storm the field because this action was initially intended to be just around 100 of us from both the Harvard and Yale, Divest Harvard and Fossil-Free Yale, to have a protest, a sit-in in the middle of the in the Yale field. But what actually happened was that around 500 students and community members from both Harvard and Yale stands, they rushed down to support us to stand in unity for climate justice and fossil fuel divestment. On campus, there has been so much support for us. The reception has been overwhelmingly positive, and right now we are at the height of our support that Fossil Fuel Divest Harvard has ever had. We have almost 400 faculty of Harvard supporting divestment. We recently passed a referendum this year with 69% of the student body voting in favor of divestment. And we also have thousands of alumni that have already voiced their support.
Mm-hmm. I do want to ask you, James, I mean, do you worry that you set the I won't lie, a lot of people were very annoyed about the thing, right? I mean, a lot of the alumni, a lot of the people who were there, and the media, generally, do you feel that it was worth it in order to get the media coverage, and as well as, some people who might have been sympathetic because of this action may not be very sympathetic. What do you think to that argument?
Right. Drastic situations call for drastic actions. We have, at the start of 2020, we will have 10 years left to address climate change according to the IPCC report. And we really want to create a sense of urgency. And we did see that there was a sense of urgency created, and that this sense of urgency is shared among the student body because so many people stormed the field with us and released statements of solidarity, even among the football players and the cheerleaders and the band team. They have issued statements of solidarity, especially the Harvard football captain. And we see this as a successful action because we were able to engage not only the Harvard and Yale communities, but also the national community in a very necessary climate discussion. We see this action as indicative of a new wave of student-led dissent in solidarity with the student climate strikers against unchecked institutional power. And we were able to get statements of support from even presidential candidates, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Julian Castro, and Tom Steyer voiced support, as well as AOC and the Gravel Institute.
Yeah, James, I do want to ask you one thing, which is that I see that a lot of the divestment is directed towards the American fossil fuel industry, and I hear you on the IPCC report. Why is there no push within yours and other divestment organizations against Harvard investments within China? China is the #1 polluter in the global environment. They have actually rolled back steps far more than anybody else in the United States. Why don't we hear more about Chinese targeting and, of course, Harvard investments within China through their own endowment fund? Is that something you guys would plan on doing?
So what we are fighting for is a moral endowment, and so we do stand in solidarity with for example, the Harvard Prison Divestment Campaign, and they do have a Just Reinvestment Fund, which is an example of a place where we can invest money in community organizations in just and sustainable ways. And we will be asking our alumni to donate to that if they are looking to donate somewhere else other than Harvard. And so that would include and exclude various morally reprehensible funds.
Yeah.
Okay.
James, how do you think about your role as an activist within a really elite sort of institution?
I think that being an activist at some place like Harvard really does come with a lot of privilege because we are not subject to the same penalties and punishments as activists of different schools and even activists of different backgrounds and races. And so we really want to leverage this privilege into really enacting meaningful change on campus because Harvard is a leading institution and the world is always looking at Harvard. And if Harvard divests, one of the reasons why we really want Harvard to divest is because it will send a large moral message to the entire world that we are not going to be complicit in the global climate crisis.
Yeah. Well, daring to speak out and challenge power, no matter where you're situated, it always takes courage. James, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for joining us, James.
What you're up to.
Really
Great,
appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Great to see you, man.
We'll have more Rising after this.